Hello, my name is Hicham Abdessamad. I'm the CEO and Chairman of Hitachi America Limited, and I am very pleased to be joined today by Hitachi's newly appointed Chief Environmental Officer, Alistair Dormer. Hi, Ali, how are you?
Hi, Hicham, I'm great. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So great pleasure to discuss a little bit of an environment with you on climate change and what's happening around the world and what is Hitachi doing. So I guess the leading question would be, we saw at Earth Day, we saw about 40 global leaders got together and virtually sort of renewed their commitment towards climate change and carbon emission reduction and obviously investments. But we do tend to think that they focus a lot on the targets, but not necessarily how you get there. And there's not a whole lot of conversation around technologies and innovation that's needed to help make that a reality. So if you can just talk a little bit about what are some of the key technologies that you feel are essential to realize these climate change commitments that we're all committed to?
Okay, I mean, that's a really good question. As you know, we have the infrastructure, but what we need to do is make that infrastructure smart. So digital technologies like blockchain, like big data, like AI is very, very important to be deployed so that we've got green infrastructure times digital to give us the infrastructure we need for the future.
That's great. And then if we think about some of the infrastructure gaps that we know about. So when you talk about mobility and energy, they're by far the highest emitters in terms of carbon and sort of the biggest contributors to that. And we all know that those are probably the hardest ones to tackle because it does take a technology or infrastructure overhaul, not just an upgrade. Just talk a little bit about sort of what is Hitachi doing around this sort of infrastructure gap that we're seeing in some of these technologies as it relates to climate change. Just want to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple areas that we're involved in. Firstly, in mobility, the most efficient form of transport from a CO2 point of view is rail. So Hitachi has 100 years experience in rail, but in the US in particular, we're involved with the upgrade of Washington Metro, Bay Area Rapid Transit, and electric trains are super efficient. We're also working in terms of how do you eliminate the requirement for diesel trains. So battery technology, hydrogen technology are all very important for the future. And battery technology really comes from, the explosion in electric vehicles that we've seen that is continuing to accelerate. So we're involved also with a very important project in the United Kingdom, looking at how do you manage big fleets of EVs? How do you manage those constraints around range, around the grid, around energy? So that's a very important study. In the US, Joe Biden's made some big commitments. Do you think the infrastructure in the US is really up to the challenge?
That's a great question. Well, he did make some big commitments, and actually, it's been very well received because it's a major financial commitment to what we call build America better and invest in climate change and invest in our future. So if you think about it, the U.S. is definitely needs a lot of upgrades throughout the whole ecosystem. So when we're talking about, if you look at the investments, they're really earmarked in very specific areas that will make the biggest impact to achieve some of these targets. So railway. $85 billion investment to upgrade the whole sort of rail infrastructure, another $80 billion investment to upgrade the Amtrak. And people talk about why rail? Well, as you know, railway, trains, they emit 80% less emissions or carbon emissions than cars. And you know this very well. So that's a big part of the equation. Also in the EV world, $185 billion in EV, whether it's EV as vehicles or charging infrastructures, which is a great start. People wonder, why is the government involved in this? Well, you have to sort of start and kind of encourage the private sector to be a part of. Last year, 1.1 billion metric tons of CO2 units were contributed by cars and trucks. So that's a big number. It's 17% of all the carbon emissions in the United States were contributed. So EV has to be a big part of this. And of course, Hitachi's got a lot of capabilities, as you mentioned, and we have grid assets, energy, railway, a lot of digital technologies, and we're ready, and we've learned a lot from what we're doing in Japan and Europe to really be a part of what America is doing. So just to kind of wrap this up, it sounds like Hitachi is a climate innovator in a way, and there is a renewed focus towards climate change. But is that core now to Hitachi's business strategy, or is this just a more of a kind of hey, this is what we think we should do. I just want to kind of, for people who want to partner with Hitachi, to really understand Hitachi's commitment and perspective around climate change.
Yeah, no, Hicham, it's absolutely fundamental and core to what we are all about as a purpose as a company. So we have domain knowledge in energy, domain knowledge in mobility, domain knowledge in industry, and we have an amazing digital capability. So we have the capability to work with governments, with cities, and with companies to help decarbonize. So you can see behind me, we are a major sponsor of COP26, which is the climate change summit at the end of the year in the UK. And this is really to demonstrate to the world that Hitachi is committed. We have signed up to the race to zero. So we will be carbon neutral in our own operations by 2030, and then reduce through the whole value chain by 80% by 2050, working right across our range of partners around the world. So it's an exciting time for us.
Indeed, it is. So, Ali, thank you very much for your time with us today.
Thanks, Hicham.